The School for Civic Action is really taking much more non-formal models of training or knowledge or things that are not sanctioned as knowledge sometimes or slightly devalued because they happen not to be within an institutional setting. What we've also realised through the practice is that there's actually a lot of legal tools for change, but because not enough people are aware of them, although they are in the public domain, then they kind of just stay dormant in government policy. So one of our interests with the School for Civic Action was to give visibility to that and also show how that can be practiced or used. And a lot of it happens to be in the Localism Act, from neighbourhood planning to community charters to right to buy, right to build, and so on and so forth. The other interest with the School for Civic Action was again based on what we were experiencing in the practice with the lack of interest in engagement within different demographics and ethnicities. We didn't want to have an imposing program or something like that, but through dialogue and through participatory art practice, some of those kind of values can start to be communicated and some people potentially can take them on. But that culture of community support, community engagement in your neighbourhood somehow has been eroded in the last 20 years, if not earlier. And so there are all these barriers, and we were kind of trying to see how we can address some of those through art commissioning and through art and community projects. But also they really need a more sustained support in order for them to really move to those members becoming teachers rather than this kind of imposition. So the other way that we tackled with that not being an imposition is that our initial stages within the way we work is also about listening. There's always a wealth of knowledge in communities, and so listening and drawing that out. And a lot of people think they don't have skills, and they have so much, and once they start talking, you start writing it and you show it to them, and that's quite a powerful moment because nobody had ever talked to them to articulate it. You start to also realize needs or what is missing in terms of knowledge that is required for these resilience in the communities or for them to operate or work. The other aspect is about really co-producing a curriculum. So that we have different mechanisms. One is through an alternative CV, getting them just in dialogue to write down all this knowledge, and then a program of working with them to then transform them into a curriculum or a course to then deliver to other residents or to friends or whoever it might be. And that could be a circular structure of teacher-student as an empowerment tool. We also have a network of what we call civic classrooms, which are partnering with projects or community groups or organisations, and it just means that we deliver some of this program with them within their spaces and could also train them to deliver them themselves. And so the idea of a decentralised network school. With the School for Civic Action, we also have an accreditation model which is based on blockchain certification. You have a wallet on your phone with all the different things that you have done. That wallet, you could put all these badges into them, and that's what the certification is. So we actually give badges to people who've completed these courses, if you like, and that they can be quite playful, from a film to a drawing and so on. As soon as they're uploaded and we kind of confirm that they've been done, those students, if you like, get the badge. And that badge could be on the bottom of their emails, it could be in the wallet, and that wallet basically becomes a way that employers could see all the different things that people have done apart from their formal education. And in that sense, there's a much more rounded kind of knowledge and experience that they have had. So maybe it's worth talking about the Lore of Blackfriars. The project was an art commission by Southwark Council. The first thing we wanted to do was to actually find one of those classrooms. Although we found the space, it became quite difficult and we couldn't use it. But what that meant was that we started to think about other kinds of spaces where classes or environments of learning can happen, such as a high street or community gardens and so on. And that was very interesting for us in our practice, because we kind of expanded our arena of learning through this project. This was a very collaborative project between Public Works, the School for Civic Action and residents. Our aim was really to work very collaboratively with the residents and also try and bring in something that really supports the community. I think if we had a place where we could be really situated, we would have had more numbers of people, just because people get interested, they drop in, and those drop-ins over time establishes a kind of engaged community. Whereas if you don't have that kind of structure, you kind of work with probably people that are quite visible and active in the community, which is what happened, and it was fantastic. So what we decided to do at the end was to hold a series of workshops, and these workshops in this kind of element of what's needed in the area, but also in terms of knowledge and what we can kind of showcase from what the people would want to see. The workshops, which were held in the local community centre, were based on community charters, where Southwark Council were also invited to be part of. There was one on fundraising. There was another one which was around how you initiate bottom-up kind of community projects to protect spaces in your neighbourhood. And then we had the big festival, the big events. And that was very much one big street party and one party in the community gardens in the Peabody estate. With the Peabody estate, we worked very directly with a local resident who then co-designed that event with us. There were also residents from the Peabody estate who got involved with one of Public Works' members who's really interested in food, to do the food and the cooking, but also to rethink the fusion of cultures in the food. And so there was a lot of discussions and conversations that happened there. The Boyfiled Street event felt like a bigger one. There was a lot which started to break down in a really playful way components of setting up a community charter. At the moment, the way that community charters are thought about are quite municipal in their formats. And I think the arts have quite a big role in actually making those things a bit more playful, and through that enabling a wider audience to engage who wouldn't otherwise want to come and sit in a meeting or an assembly or something like that. So that breakdown looked like the complaints choir. In the community charter, they always kind of talk about the complaints that the community have. As we did the workshop around the complaints, we all kind of left going, oh, we can imagine why you wouldn't want to do that. But then the processing of that and the fun in transforming that into a choir and a song to then sing it with everybody else made it much more light. It's almost like you were dealing with those issues through that process. And that was really positive. And also then in the street party, having the complaints choir performance and everybody else kind of singing those also really talked about a certain solidarity, which was really important.
Don't write me off, I'm not the Money is not the hazard. When you're just forever. Your time means forever. Dear Counselor, each or rent. Which one shall I pay for? Renter. Passive aggressive fake smile, but really inside I'm seething.
Another workshop that we did both in the event and outside the event was a workshop where we filled in this record your local knowledge, and we called it social wealth or community wealth because a lot of the way community wealth building is framed at the moment, from my understanding, is around financial economy. And I think there are other forms of capital in terms of cultural and social which are also really important within that, and I think us focusing just on money the whole time has obviously not created very healthy neighbourhoods or environments. So we need to kind of shift that. So we found this really interesting as a way to then they could either become curriculums if they're interested, but again it needs a very slow burning process in order to kind of work with people, support them to kind of deliver these things. And what came out of all that was that actually people always said, oh, we have very little time. So time has become this complete scarce resource. And that led to another workshop that was part of the festival, which was around Christmas time. So it was about this gift of time, so that you don't give your family or your neighbours a gift that you've bought, but actually that you start to write down what bit of your time you're willing to give. And because people had already done some of the knowledge documentation, then we could refer to that and say, based on that, what do you think you could give and who would it be for? And so they became kind of gift cards. So all of that already starts to produce in a very indirect way content that could be really useful for setting up a community charter. But still it was very difficult with, again, all these kind of policy documents and so on that was done by the Young Foundation for local people to decipher. How do you actually do this? That's where we kind of did the colouring book, how to set up a community charter that people could take home, do it as a colouring book with their children, and then potentially they could go and look it up and see whether they're interested to take anything like that further or not. But this is not just for communities, it's also for councillors or local authorities, because again, to find a playful way to do this is going to be much more beneficial. We also had a curtain within the milk float. The milk float was supposed to be the civic classroom. And in there we had some conversations about what they are, community charters, and how you set one up, and so on and so forth. In the event we also had a listening booth by artist Claudia Firth, and that's very much part of her artistic practice. And I think that listening is a really important part in actually developing any engagement, community or art project. We also really enjoyed kind of using familiar formats as a way to then slightly subvert them, so people have an understanding of it but then are surprised by it. So I think that's something we really enjoy, and that's why rather than doing face painting, we worked with a local face painter, but we did these local community wealth skills tattoos, which were drawn by Morgie Shan, who did all our illustrations. And so people had like community wealth tattoos instead of a lion or Mickey Mouse or something like that. And we thought that's kind of really important because it also started to trigger a conversation of what is that? Why would I want that? It's important to note that the tattoos were temporary, you could wash them off. And finally, we also invited another artist called Sally Child and her collaborator Helen, who did the Tea Trolly Dance. And that was really interesting because Boyfiled Street had quite a few residents who've been living there for almost 50 years and are now elderly, and they were talking about tea dances. And again, changing the format slightly, they kind of do routines where you can actually dance certain themes. So maybe in conclusion, what's been really, really successful is for us to test a different format for the School for Civic Action, which is very events-based. It actually isn't targeted to a very specific group, but actually was for a much wider public to be involved, and that has a very different kind of engagement. I think for us to see the place of learning as much wider within the city than just the kind of civic classrooms or spaces within community buildings or organizations. And also the fact that what is really important is how do we actually sustain the legacy of these projects, and that's something we're not completely clear about at the moment, and there are no resources to do that, and I think that is quite important as a strategy going forward.